Welcome to the Instillery Top Shelf Technology. I'm Jeremy Nees, the Chief Technology Officer at the Instillery, and today I've got Ryan Joe, Product Manager at the Instillery, and Joe Hassell from Actifio joining me. Welcome along, Joe.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from?
Sure. So originally an Auckland boy, I now live in Raglan. Been working in tech for the last 17 odd years. Started as a developer and I've worked my way through architecture and pre-sales and into sales for Actifio now.
So what were you developing back in the day?
Oh God, that was it was mostly Java, billing platforms, yeah, energy billing platforms. I did a bit of work for some telcos, various different components. Did some interesting projects actually back in the day with sort of DevOps before it was DevOps. You know, automating infrastructure builds. Right, in the days when blades were brand new. So yeah, some fun stuff.
Cool, man. And you live in Raglan. You
do.
like to surf?
Occasionally,
maybe sometimes at lunchtime.
When the surf's good.
Yeah. You work for a US software company that's been valued at over $1 billion.
Yeah, so Actifio's 10, 11 years old now, last valuation was 1.3-ish. So it's a good life, you know. We're getting the balance between lots of meetings, pressure cooker, Auckland, Wellington, and then actually getting the back end admin work done at home, and you know, sneaking in a quick surf or lunchtime, or picking up the kids after school, that kind of thing.
So how long do you spend in Raglan versus Auckland and Wellington?
Every week's variable. So the goal is to kind of work at home Monday and Friday, and then travel Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But it seldom actually works out like that. So it's just hit and miss. And I'm probably away from home 2 nights a week, and at home the rest of the time.
Talking about picking up the kids, I understand that you truly are living the dream. You are a founding member of the Tech Kia Carnival fan club as well, with Mike Jenkins.
That's right. I believe you'll be joining soon, Jeremy, with your tribe of 8, right? You're almost at a soccer team, aren't you?
Get in there, mate. Get in there.
Yeah. Look, I'd just like to put a plug in for the Kia Carnival, a truly awesome vehicle.
Wonderful. And that would be great for SneakerNet. And given we're here today to talk about democratising data, what a great introduction, Joe.
There you go.
So people talk about data is the new oil. And I think we probably kind of understand that there's these social media companies, you know, like you've got Facebook, you've got Google with, you know, all the ads and search and that kind of stuff. And they know what to do with data. They make money out of data and that kind of stuff. But people say data is the new oil. What do you think that means for a typical Kiwi enterprise or corporate company?
I think there's a few things to say about that. So, I mean, if you look at where the wealth creation over the last 40 years has been, it's all been around software, right? Even like a business like Amazon, which is ostensibly a retailer, is really all about the IP of the software that they're creating, and genuinely the wealth creation is coming from data, because data is effectively, information is an infinite resource. You know, if you think about our materials economy, we're not making any more atoms on this planet, right? Unless we start mining asteroids, there's no more atoms, right? So this is a closed loop, finite system, and energy, right? We've got oil, but that's running out, and we can't really harness enough of the solar energy. So that's also a sort of closed loop economy to a point. But information is really exponential, and the things you can do with data and the things you can create and the way that you can monetize that data is really transformational in terms of being able to true wealth creation.
So from a resource perspective, you're kind of also saying it's pretty important to our future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, managing that data intelligently, being able to make the most use of it, especially as the data volumes grow. You know, like, I don't need to repeat the statistics. You've all heard them about the rate of expansion of data and the amount of data that's created, you know, this year versus the last 20 years is going to dwarf it. So, you know, that's not going to stop.
So why do you think it's so valuable?
That's an excellent question. If I had an answer, I'd probably be a millionaire. I mean, I think the fact is that, you know, that's where all the intellectual property is stored in data, and being able to make use of that data for intelligent purposes is what's creating that wealth.
I think some of the simple things we see with it as well is, you know, improving customer experience. So we've got data sitting somewhere, and again, I'll try to bring this back to a bit more of a, you know, what a New Zealand corporate or enterprise could look like. They may have a, you know, CRM system or some, you know, often monoliths that they've had for years that holds all the customer data, holds a whole lot of transactional records about the interactions with that customer, what services they may get, that kind of stuff, and often it's quite locked up and sort of, you know, it's hard to get it out of those systems. You're trying to provide new customer experiences, new products to market, and that stuff's all sitting in a you know, bit of a data silo, often in some proprietary software that's pretty hard to get it in and out of. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see a lot of that. When I started in this role with Actifio, I remember the first time I encountered an enterprise with more than 10 terabytes in a single database, and it was actually our first customer in New Zealand, government department, and I was stunned. You know, wow, that's a big database. And you know, now commonly or frequently we see customers with databases of 15 to 30 terabytes, single instance databases, right? And that's a huge amount of information to be locked up. And you know, the value of that information ranges from, you know, genomics on our dairy herds through to, as you say, customer experience, or, you know, tracking how long a customer looked at a particular page on a website. All that kind of data is all locked up, and being able to make use of that data in novel and creative ways is really going to unlock a bunch of opportunity.
Cool. We talk about it being locked up. That there's no APIs, that, you know, you can't easily interact with it. It doesn't integrate well with other kind of formats. Like, you know, we've got an explosion of cloud data storage services now, a lot more use of object storage, and you know, rather than relational database types, different databases like your graph databases, etc. Tell us a bit about what lock-in actually means in that sense.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things there. So, you know, we talk about data having weight and gravity, right? Yep. Gravity being it's hard to lift it and move it. You know, while SSDs have got faster and bandwidth has got faster and cheaper, it turns out it still takes a long time to move 10 terabytes of data. And if you need to have multiple copies of that data for multiple different purposes, it gets very expensive very quickly. And that's the weight, right? You know, if you're making 10 copies of 10 terabytes, there's 100 terabytes of data. And if you're doing that on-premise or in the cloud, either way, it's going to be expensive. And if you want to be able to process lots of data, you often need to have multiple copies of it. And, you know, we see organizations making use of that capability to deliver that functionality so that they can parallelize a whole bunch of queries, for example. So being able to unlock that data is in multiple purposes. So you might need to, you know, run your end-of-month querying, for example, and that's going to take a different, put a bunch of load on your database system that you don't necessarily want. So being able to make a copy of that data and make it available either via a different interface or an API perhaps, gives you opportunities to process that data in new and novel ways.
Cool. So I could throw more money at my production system, but that kind of just scales up a little bit, vertical scalability. If I can take copies of that, shunt some off to AWS, for example, I can do a whole lot of cool stuff. I can spin maybe spot instances up, I can process that, and all of a sudden that data's a whole lot more active.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, being able to, you know, feed your BI database incrementally into, you know, some of the public cloud machine learning capabilities. And, you know, if you've got 15 terabytes of BI data and you're adding, you know, a terabyte a week, you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to ship 15 terabytes every week. You want to be able to ship that incrementally and add to your store of data that you know, cloud machine learning can be turned on to.
So you talked about developing cloud telco billing systems, right? And these things are some of the most notorious systems for having lock-in in our industry, I think. But they hold a wealth of data about customers' history in terms of purchasing. Often they're supplemented by usage patterns and that kind of data, where you can go, how could we structure offers to these customers and that kind of stuff, and really improve their experience. Ryan, you've got vast amount of experience in the telco industry from a product and marketing perspective. Have you experienced, instances where you've wanted to get to some of the data that you may hold around customers to, form a new offer to whatever it may be, and just found that too hard to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we, before then, I hadn't really had any experience with cloud computing, but running SQL queries across massive databases and trying to get updated data and recent data enough for us to be relevant for both personalizing offers and even test data was a massive pain in the ass.
I can give you a great customer example of this.
Yeah, go.
I won't name the customer because we're not pitching here, but the idea is basically they had a nightly process that they wanted to run to do some forecasting on what the next day's trading activity would look like, right? So they had a very large database, and the traditional model they had was to take a backup of that database after the market had closed for the day, restore that database into a test environment, right, where they could run all of their analysis algorithms to try and forecast, if this happens, then how's that going to pan out, etc. And all of the traders would compete for the best model to run that night. So they'd have 6 or 7 hours to run their model overnight on this single database, which was a copy of their production, right? But by democratizing that data and making it, removing the gravity and the weight of that data, gave them the ability to create multiple copies of that data instance, so that anyone who had a model that they wanted to run and test to see what the next day's activity might look like or forecast it was able to run that instantly. And that's leveraging the scalability of public cloud and democratizing data by virtualizing it effectively.
So examples like that are really interesting to me. When Jeremy was talking about data being the new oil, really popular in Silicon Valley, do you think that New Zealand businesses are doing the most to take advantage of that? And if not, what should they be doing?
Oh, look, I think they're trying, and I think that there's definitely a desire to. I think sometimes we have a little bit of fear of failure or fear of sticking our neck out and breaking stuff, rather than that, fail fast and break things kind of mentality that you see more of in Silicon Valley. And perhaps that's to do with our, lack of venture funding or whatever that is. But, I think a lot of enterprises could do a lot more, a lot quicker than we see them doing today. But I don't think it's from a lack of desire.
Do you think there are additional risks that come with that, and what should people be looking for? When I think about data, I think about Facebooks and Googles, and you think about like the Cambridge Analytica stuff and privacy concerns.
Yeah, and billing platforms, a good example, right? Lots of personal information and those sorts of things. So yeah, what do people do around that?
I think there's a bunch of sort of common sense things that you can do around managing your data sensibly. So, obfuscating data, masking data, integrating with platforms that can take care of that in your data pipeline, and really treating data as an asset. And assets are something to be protected and venerated, right? So sensible management policies, role-based access control, all the kind of stuff that we have around our infrastructure. Bringing that sort of those security and controls to the data layer, and really starting to think about data as perhaps we used to think about infrastructure more.
Yeah, and I think we see that across the board with services that create effectively data assets or what data products for internal teams to consume. So it may be that you're using a mix of different products to get data from one place to another, to store it, to analyze it, etc. But you're trying to produce, in fact, a product to somebody internal, like it could be a BI person, it could be a data scientist, to go, I now have this data collated for me that I can go and analyze. I can now actually make sense of that because somebody's done the hard work to integrate it. And I think that's part of when we talk about democratizing data. the integration of those pieces. Everybody's had these, great ideas around big data, and in fact, big data, you don't hear about it, I don't think, to the same extent you did a couple of years ago, and that people are a lot more pragmatic now. But that joining together of different data sets, we see a lot of customers with a lot of their data in platforms like SAP, like Oracle, and this is that stuff that's typically not easy to move around, or it's expensive, because if you want to have another copy here to analyze and that kind of stuff, you've got to relicense it, or you've got to store stuff in quite high performance areas. What kind of solutions do you see to those sort of problems, or how do you see people can you give us an example of people overcoming that kind of stuff where it's in a traditional system and they're really trying to do more with that data?
Yeah, so I mean, the data that you're talking about is really the crown jewels of enterprise data a lot of the times.
Yep.
It's really where the true value of the enterprise lies, and in that sense, it makes it's really important for the enterprise to protect it, but also to get the value out of it. And so, there's a number of different things that you can do in order to unlock that data. So, getting it out of that system into other systems, but specifically, like, we like to think about people treating data as a pipeline. So coming back to the oil is the data is the new oil analogy. If you're thinking about pipelining that data into other systems, then really making that data transportable and transferable between systems. So, we see a lot of, you guys must as well, and in the cloud world, people doing a lot of DevOps, continuous integration type work, right? So that's sort of your application development through to your application deployment and operational management of your applications, right? And we're really looking for data consumers and data producers to start taking that sort of a mentality to their data assets. So really thinking about the life cycle of those data assets. So how are we provisioning copies of them? How are we managing them from inception to destruction? How are we protecting them when we move them between sites? What sort of layers of encryption or obfuscation do we need to enact, and how are we ensuring that those are being enacted at the right place and in the right time without making it difficult for people to make use of that data, because obviously, you've got your data consumers going, give me more of the data, and you've got your data producers going, well, hang on, we need to make sure that you're only getting access to the right data, because, if you're a large telco, you don't want some random developer getting access to all of your customer information, right? Obviously, that would be a huge breach.
Yep.
But you do want to have them be able to do accurate integration testing, for example. So managing the pipeline of life cycle of that data is really critical.
And it's often those copies of data that show up in somebody's breach, right? It's they've gone and dropped it into some object storage in cloud, and nobody's secured. And well, there you go. You just found that. Hey, just connecting that up, right? We're talking about the crown jewels. They're sitting in platforms like SAP and Oracle databases, Microsoft SQL, some really rich information. And we're talking about going fast, CI/CD pipelines, maybe doing development of new stuff in cloud, that kind of stuff, and connecting that up and going, you can move this data up there. That sounds expensive. Does it have to be?
Look, I mean, there's multiple ways to skin a cat, and yes, you can make it really expensive if you want to. But by leveraging things like storage virtualization in the cloud, being able to deliver rapid, storage-efficient copies of data without having to make full copies of data, it really is a possibility today. And being able to integrate that with your backup and your DR platform, for example, to be able to leverage and offset those data assets in the cloud is a great way of generating some of those efficiencies. Particularly if you can automate a bunch of that capability.
Cool. Any other thoughts that you'd like to leave us with on the subject? You've obviously got your experience. You come from a company that's doing some amazing data stuff globally. You've probably got some stories around some really interesting projects you've worked on or come across. Any tidbits you want to throw out there?
I mean, tidbits. I think the trend that we see across the market is right in your space, right? The Instillery guys, you guys were born in this space, which is that of multi-cloud, and from what we see across from the biggest enterprises in country to the smallest is that's really the direction people are going. So the right fit for the right product in the right cloud, and that might be some on-premise stuff as well. And I don't think the on-premise deployment stuff's ever going to go away completely. So from an enterprise perspective or a governance perspective, really thinking about how you're managing that data, not just across its life cycle, but across all of your enterprise footprints, right? So it may be that you've got your email and your OneDrive and your SharePoint in Office 365. Well, is that business critical data in there, or is that just data you don't really care about, right? And if it's business critical, then how are you carefully managing that life cycle? Do you want it all in one cloud provider's infrastructure? Do you want to distribute it across another cloud provider's infrastructure, or bring some of it back to your on-premise? Likewise, do you need to have an active and a passive data center in New Zealand anymore, or can you have your active production workloads running in your data center here, and then your DR running in some public cloud? It's another sort of trend that we're seeing a lot of, and what does that mean for your data, and how do you manage that data across that different infrastructure seamlessly without resorting to multiple point tools? If you're doing cloud native snapshots, then now you've got 3 different clouds. Now you're managing cloud native snapshots in 3 different platforms, as well as whatever your on-premise capability is, right? So trying to really get a coherent strategy around managing data through its life cycle and throughout your enterprise footprint, I think is really what CIOs and CTOs like yourself should be thinking about, from an idea to try and make a coherent strategy, but also make that data coherent so that it can be consumed and appropriate value derived from it. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it does, and I'm just going to wrap that up on with an example. Right, we've great customer of ours. I'll hopefully get them on this show in a couple of weeks' time. Sanford, they're New Zealand's oldest publicly listed company, and they're doing some awesome stuff with data in ways that you wouldn't really expect. And it's exactly the scenario you talk about. They've got some stuff here in New Zealand. They've got some stuff happening in AWS. They're moving their data around the place. They're doing some really cool stuff with it. I'm not going to unpick that right now, but I think the use cases go beyond these sort of some of the big gnarly things. In terms of, you don't need to be a massive company to get started with this. I think you don't need to have this data. It's a project called Big Data, and nobody quite knows what it means, except for it's got a lot of zeros after it. It's about being pragmatic, getting started, and actually taking some risk, and not in the way that you don't care about this important data, but in the way that you go, let's just try to move some data around the place and try to analyze it in different ways, and let's have a bit of a hypothesis around what we might find out of that data. Give something a try, and often it doesn't cost a lot to try it, and you can turn it off afterwards.
That's the beauty.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Thanks, Joe, for coming all the way from Raglan to come and talk about democratizing data.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate your time.
Cool.
Cheers, Ryan.
Thank you. Cheers, Ryan.
Thanks.